So want to talk to you guys today about DMT. I've been doing a fair bit of data conversion lately with some of my projects and thought, there's a lot of little tricks you pick up over the years that might be useful. Now, we're dealing with a pretty technical audience here, so I would say that this might be old hat for some of you. I'm hoping that you could at least leave with a nugget or two. Let me start sharing my screen here and we will talk through some of the exciting opportunities that DMT has to offer. All right. So let's talk first about DMT itself and kind of come up with a base understanding here for the person new to DMT. So DMT at the core is using a set of methods that Epicor has that are called their update EXT methods. I remember back in 905 when they first came out with update EXT, and this was when service-oriented architecture was still a big fancy buzzword in the world shortly after Six Sigma kind of tanked. But so these methods have to do with the mass updating of data in a manner that is more table-based and table set-based than it is based on a single method or a single set of methods that are strung together. You'll note that these are the same methods that Epicor's REST APIs use, and their updatable dashboards as well. So that was kind of some forward thinking on their part to put together these large methods to support large scale data updates, kind of build that into their architecture. So some things that are kind of important to understand about update EXT, and this is going to relate then to the work you're doing in DMT, so that they don't map one-to-one with like the client's user experience. So a client might be working in Epicor and go through a bunch of steps, and the actual logic is happening in a bunch of chunks, right? Epicor has a bunch of methods that are fired off on data change events or various activities before you actually get to the part of updating a record and committing it to the database. So you have these different layers. Sometimes the UI is committing business logic activities that aren't on the server side. And so people kind of get used to having those there. So when they switch to DMT, those problems come up. I remember I was working with a consultant once, and she was just completely flummoxed that she couldn't get a part load to commit. And we looked at it, and it turns out she was putting in the descriptions of the part classes. So the part class description is understandably what you're picking when you're in the user interface, but at the data level, they want the actual methods. So those layers are there, aren't there to help you. So if you're creating that UI might relate to multiple method calls to get that data all perfectly set up. Those method calls, they set values, they allow certain values, they allow you to pick one value and have it relate to another. They perform some validation before you actually commit the record. Update EXT it's more of a data centric. It's more like it's expecting that you know what those values are, you know what the minimum amount are. We'll talk a lot about minimum amount with some of these updates that we go through today in the demos. So to be able to make a record and commit it to the database, you need to have a good understanding of that data and the correct values to be used, because it's much more data centric than it is, I'd say, logically centric. All right, so why use DMT? Now, when I see customers using DMT, I see them using it in a lot of ways. Some of them recommended, some not as much, but it's used for a lot of people. And again, as we saw in the poll, you can see that folks are using it for a number of different reasons. So one obvious is data conversion, right? When we go live, we want to load all this data from an old system, and we do go through all that extraction from the old system. We transform it and convert it and make it all Epicor friendly, and then we want to load that back in. And that normally has to do with two base sets of files, as you have your setup and your master files, so your parts, your moms, your suppliers, customers, those kind of core building blocks. And then you have open loads of transactional files. So when I talk transactional file, I'm speaking to an open sales order, a PO job, or even inventory load. I kind of take in my mind, the parts are master file. Their inventory is a transactional file, anything that's hitting the part tran table. I curse that table in my sleep. Ongoing management, of course, is a great area where DMT can be valuable. Now, again, it can also be misused to cover up for bad processes. And I'm not a recommender of that, but I've seen people do that. And I guess that's the lesser of two evils, perhaps. So master file updates, I see this a lot, and this makes a lot of sense in my mind. Is you have a supplier commits a new price list and sends it to you, and you need to update all your values and your different pricing tiers and such. You want to get in there and do that. DMT is a nice way to make that update happen. Simple with, say, parts. You will decide that you're going to outsource a whole suite of your products. You need to turn those from manufacturer to purchasing and add other setup and perhaps change inventory levels. DMT is a nice way to make those kind of mass changes. I see engineering folks always using DMT extensively, especially if you're in a place where they're generating a lot of new product, both in entry and maintenance. And we're going to go through a scenario today that has some maintenance, engineering maintenance flavors to it. And then transactional assistance, right? You get certain areas. I see certain customers use DMT where they don't have physical staff to do things. Also see it where, and this again, it's not necessarily something I recommend, but in environments that are still very paper-based, where folks write down their timesheets and then someone else has to key those in. Well, I've seen folks use DMT as a means of getting those labor entry records in quickly. Again, I tend to push data entry at the point of use, but such as it is, it's sometimes it's not a hill you can die on. But also I've seen folks use that with PowerShell scripts to automate the loading of records. So using DMT with some PowerShell scripts and some watcher programs to look for incoming files from a vendor can provide some integration level work to grab that file, load it in, get from point A to point B. And that can be very helpful in situations where other people would have to be keying that in manually. And the record count, the transaction count is high. Most unfortunately, I often see it used in the correction of data mishaps. So sometimes you see my clip art there, the database is kind of off base. You might even say it's been debased. And I sometimes call this the sheep out of the barn phenomenon. You ever heard the saying, when it comes to breakfast, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed? I remember hearing that for the first time, and it was an interesting farmyard metaphor that it took me a while to come up with. But in the idea of data management, we need more pigs. We need more company-wide commitment to data management. When that's absent, when you go live and you're not quite ready to handle the transactional load, both at a master file or transactional file level, the data can get dirty in a hurry. DMT is one way of kind of reining that in and getting yourself back to a level point. And hopefully that kind of takes your organization kind of ready to do things better starting now. So you have lots of those starting now moments. And I've seen this, for part management. If your engineering team gets overwhelmed, I see this with job transactions, right? You have jobs that have shipped already, but the transactions aren't appropriate. The materials haven't been issued, or the labor hasn't been entered, shipments or receipts, stuff that happens physically, and now you're trying to catch that up in the system. Or inventory transfers. I've seen that happen where inventory transfers get way out of hand, and now you're trying to figure out just where is everything. Now, again, there are probably some better ways to do some of these things inside of the system through cycle counting, year-end inventory, et cetera. But this is one option. And as I like to say there, you see at the bottom, when your data goes nuclear, and we blame the engineering, it's always due to bad bombs. All right, so speaking of bad, let's talk about that sheep out of the barn scenario. Now, I live in the sticks. I don't know if you know this. I live in Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, rural agricultural area. I have no idea how the Packers are doing. I'm still doing a little celebratory dance over the Milwaukee Bucks, mind you. But live in the sticks, and the farmers are out right now. Now that all the fields have been mowed, they're here. The manure spreaders are out in full force doing their thing. And right now, the whole county smells just really tangy right now. I mean, you can almost taste it. But now that I've made you all jealous, let's jump into a real world kind of sheep out of the barn scenario and talk about how a problem can be correct both at the master file and the transactional file level when we're running into some data challenge. So I went and mocked up a situation here, a scenario where a finished good manufacturing part, BDF FG01, has a few mom issues. So it has a part material that's not linked to an operation, right? good standard best practice. You want those parts linked to their operations. And two, the operation is linked to the wrong resource. So we need to change that operation so that it's linked to the right resource. So when we're scheduling, we can be scheduling against that appropriate resource. And the problem is active jobs already exist for this part, and some of those are released. So if you're thinking about an environment, I see this happen a lot where engineering fixes a problem, but because of backlog, because you have all these jobs that are out there that are still festering, those problems keep filtering in slowly in the shop saying, well, no, you haven't fixed the problem. I'm still seeing it. I told you about it Monday and I'm seeing it again on Friday. And the problem is, well, we changed the part master, so all future jobs will be fixed. But what about all these other things that are already out there? So this is kind of the scenario that I'm going to have us walk through and talk through today. And using DMT in a couple of different capacities to do that. So we're going to look at correcting part records, both on the routing and the BOM. We're going to be deleting unreleased jobs, wiping those out of the schedule. We'll be correcting and rescheduling some jobs that are already too far along to be deleted outright. And then we're going to recreate those jobs that we had whacked before. All right, so let's start with master file updates. So in this case here, we have a part that has some problems, and we're going to run two different updates. We're going to run the bill of materials update to correct the part material that's not related to the appropriate related operation. And we're going to correct the operation. Actually, we're going to be jumping to the part op details. So remember how you have part rev, and then part rev has part opper, and then part opper has a child table called part op detail. That's where the magic is to set that proper resource. So we're going to set it from one to another. And there's two different routines we're going to use there. One note on both of these is when you're doing this, you need to have your ECO group ID, because we're basically formulating a checkout of that product. I use DMT because I can't type to save my life. Okay, so let's first look at the problem before we run off fixing it. All right, so as I had said, I have this part, BDF FG01, and it has a couple of problems. So I'm going to look at its revision. We're going to jump into method tracker here very quickly. All right, so we'll look at the material problem here. Okay, classic problem. Material has no related operation. So in a complex scenario, that material's due date may not be appropriate relative to when it actually needs to be consumed. Real common. And when you're doing like a cutover load of your part master, your product master, you want to make sure that you load your operations before you load your materials, so those materials can link up to your operations appropriately. At the very least, get linked up to number 10 so they have something driving them. So that's the problem here that we're dealing with. And then the operation problem that I'm running into. So we look at this operation, and it has, for a scheduling resource, this resource called BDF01, and I want to change that to BDF02. So I'm going to run through the process now. I'll keep method tracker up so that we can see the results of this in real time. We'll jump into DMT. All right, so I have DMT up here, and I have a whole bunch of different routines open right now. And I'm going to start with the bill of materials update. So I have a single part that I'm going to be updating, single part material record. And as you can see, I am setting the related operation field. The rest of these fields here are all the necessary fields that Epicor needs to find this record and correct it. So I have, as you can see, probably 10 routines I'm going to try to run today. Well, fingers crossed that I can get through all of these without too many error messages. So I'm going to quickly kick this off and process it. And okay, great. Bill of materials results, nice little window comes up. One finished. So for DMT neophytes, the count number is the number that you're working through versus the number that you have to complete. The number of errors gets tallied below. If something blows up, that'll show up in this little helpful window here. You get an RPM count that's telling you how many records per minute you're doing. So for checking out a part and updating that operation, 26 makes sense. It's going to be a little slower than some other loads. You also have the ability to add, delete, or update. So in my case, I just check the update because I know the record exists there and I just want to find that thing and update it. So that being the case, why don't we jump in real quick and verify that the change occurred as intended. So we will refresh the screen here really quickly. And we will also helps if I'm in the right forms. We come to here to method tracker. All right, so we come here. Uh-oh. Looks like we have our first problem. It did not update as intended. Let me just quickly check all those fails. I must have had. Oh, that's because I'm checking the operation, but I updated the material. Again, user error. Let's go to our materials now, and you can see that the material is now linked back to operation 10. So now operation 10 is the operation to which that material will be driven when MRP schedules it. So let's go ahead and do the next routine. Now I have the bill of operations update. Now this is one of those things I like to, when I'm using DMT, there's a couple of ways, there's tree views and such that you can navigate. I just like typing them up. The problem, of course, is if you type up routing, you won't find what you're looking for. You'll find something financial. I try to avoid finances whenever possible. So some of this is just remembering that if you're going to be loading a part bomb or a part boo, you need to start with bill, and then it'll take you there from that. All right, so that said, let me go ahead and run this bill of operations update. So as you can see here, I want to change, and I make sure, okay, I want to change that resource ID from BDF01 to BDF02. You'll notice here, this is a 2-table update. So when you're doing a bill of operations update, you need to get to the part op detail table by first getting to the part opper table. Now you'll see here, these are ECO offers, right? ECO is the mirror records when the part is being engineered. Ultimately, when the thing gets checked in, it's committed back to the part opper. So my brain always goes straight to the part opper. So I talk in that terminology. So the goal here is to switch that from one to the other. So I will reload and we will update and process. Oh, I must have done this once before, so I'm just going to clear the existing log. And all is well here. Again, no error messages. So that tells me that the data would have gone in as intended. And I'll come back to method tracker and I'll jump down to my scheduling resources tab for my operations. And now you see BDF02 has been updated, which is a good thing. And we are off and running. So that's the simple part of correction of the part master records. And if we go ahead and we look at that part in question, and we refresh that, you'll notice that there are some new records being created to manage these changes that I have just made, which is nice. So now it keeps a log of these changes coming in, coming out. That can be very helpful when you're trying to figure out just when did this thing change and why. DMT does allow for that logging to fall through, because you'd hate for that to be happening kind of behind in the, through one of the proverbial back doors. So that's helpful. All right. So that said, that's really as simple as this master file change needs to be. Biggest thing here was that we were doing a multi-table, and jump back here just for a quick second here, that the neat thing here is when you're doing a multi-table update, you have all the fields, all the key fields that got you to that parent record. You don't need to re-add those as part of the DMT run, because those can all apply now to this child. All you need is the related key. In this case, it's the op detail sequence will get you to that child record that you're looking to update. So it's a nice little way of bundling that. But once you get into a child table, we'll talk a little bit about this again. You can see here, these are all parent table where you just have the field name. When you get to child tables, now you need to specify the parent and the child with the pound sign as the divider. So that's a little thing you need to do when you're working with a multi-table update. All right, so let's jump back to, okay, so we've talked about master file updates. Let's talk about transactional. So now this gets a little more dicey. Transactional files have a lot more corrections to do. And I will admit the last time I got involved with corrections, it involved several days in a padded cell, and I'd rather not go there. So when we talk about updating master files, that's one thing. It fixes problems for the future, but it doesn't make those instantaneous changes that are going to affect your shop floor immediately. And that's a problem. So let's talk about what we do to correct the bombs and routings of open jobs to make them right so that the shop sees that much quicker. Now, of course, you'll run into situations where you may, for something that's already been started or issued or what have you, some of that you might just choose not to include that in your update. And really, it was kind of ironic that Joe had a session here on BAQs, because a DMT expert is probably better at BAQs, because DMT is kind of pretty straightforward. The challenge most often is getting the right data that you can update without creating other problems, right? You don't want to be giving the shop too much of a moving target. And of course, you need to be thinking about if you're printing paperwork, if you're in a paperwork environment where you have job travelers and job pick lists and such, that if you've already printed those and sent them to the shop, a process step needs to happen to mop those up. That's kind of an ancillary consideration at this point. And then, yeah, as they say, everyone remembers the bombs, but nobody thinks about the booze. And after a year of consulting from my basement here with the pandemic, I think about the booze more and more. So let's talk about the jobs themselves. And yeah, let me run through this slide here, kill you with a PowerPoint before we do that. So we're going to run a series of updates. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete the jobs that have not been worked on. So we have a series of jobs. I've named them all smartly. You know, we say as consultants, we don't promote smart naming conventions. Then we do demos and everything's smartly named. Oh, well. So we have a BDF 06 to BDF 10. These are a bunch of jobs that I created through quick job entry, and we're going to whack those quickly and get them out of the way. So we're assuming those are jobs that were not yet transacted on, not yet released to the shop. And we can just whack them and recreate them later. So then we also have, we need to update the existing jobs that have been released to the shop. So this would be BDF 01 to BDF 05. We're going to run two routines again, one for the job material and one for the job operation. And similarly, the operation is actually going to update its child table job op detail. Then we're going to go and reschedule those jobs, because Epicor holds that data in multiple places, and the actual shop schedule is not on the job. It's in this ancillary table. I think it's called resource time used table. What a strange name for a table. That's your scheduling table, but I'm not here to argue naming conventions. So we're going to run the scheduling engine and mop that up and then have a look. And then we're going to go ahead and create the new jobs through quick job entry as through DMT to build those back in together. Now, again, this might not be something you would do in a real world situation if MRP is running again at night, but I have customers who don't have MRP, so maybe they have value for kind of making that work. And so to do that, let me pull up my demo environment again. And so now we're going to start. So as I had noted, you can add, update, or delete records. So I have a family of jobs here that haven't been transacted on. I've set it to delete. I'm going to go ahead and process. And if all goes as planned, excellent. We have a whole suite of jobs that have been deleted now. Probably should have showed them to you before I actually went and deleted them, but never too late. Well, I guess in databases, sometimes it is too late, but it's never not always too late. I'm lousy at aphorisms. I apologize. Okay, so now we have 5 jobs here. These are the jobs that have been released to the schedule, as you can see, and they have the same problems as the parts, right? We're missing a related operation, and the operations themselves are scheduled against the wrong resource. And you can see here on the job, this BDF 01 exists in 2 places. One is the job op detail record, and then one is the shop schedule, or the resource time used record. You can see here in field help, it doesn't do a great job of telling you what actual table that is, but that's a different seminar. Okay, so we are going to go back to DMT, and we are going to run through this process now. So I have these 5 jobs, and I have a no related operation here. So what I probably should do before I do that is make sure that I get my proper related operation. All right, so we're going to relate everything to operation 10. Nice and simple. One thing too, when you're running DMT, this should be old hat for the experts out there, but for us novices, one thing that's very helpful is you can make change to your source table and then just reload, and voila, now your related operation field has been found. So in this case, the company plant and the job number, the assembly sequence, the material sequence, the part number get you to that value that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this as an update. You'll notice sometimes that process button grays out if something's not changed here, and you just have to hit the reload to get that button to be ready for prime time. So I will run that. Okay, everything looks good there. Jump back to the job here quickly and confirm that that worked as intended. So now we're expecting that value to be a ripe and rosy 10. Very good. So now we come back to our DMT and we work to our next activity, which is updating the job operation. So as you'll remember, we need to update the job op detail record to reference BDF02 instead of BDF01. So I'm going to not add new, I'm just going to update and I will process. All right, that happened quick. That's good. We'll open up the job entry screen now and go to operations, scheduling resource, and refresh. And now you see BDF02 is the scheduled scheduling resource, but it is not the scheduled resource. If you come here, you will notice the scheduled resource in the shop schedule is still BDF01. If you were looking at the schedule for a shop based on work queue or based on the resource scheduling board, this will fall under BDF01. Why is that? Well, the job has not been rescheduled, and it's the scheduling engine that runs and says, okay, this is my resource that I'm going to use. I need to schedule now and plug this into the shop schedule. So that is a separate step. And fortunately, DMT has the ability to schedule jobs. Now, this was something I just came in contact with myself kind of lately. I've been playing around with it. Clever little device. I mean, in the past, we've done silly stuff where you would create like an embedded customization that calls the scheduling engine and then iterates through a data set and does all that real finicky stuff. And it looks like, you know, based on the work that I've done lately, this looks like a pretty nice little tool. Again, this is a case where the fields you include are really important because a scheduling engine takes a bunch of different parameters. And those parameters, of course, will change how the thing works. So in my case, I'm back scheduling the first operation, operation 10. I've done this in multi-operation cases. And yeah, you schedule the first one, you back schedule it, and it'll reschedule everything else out. I think there's a setting there to do that as well. Don't have it on there, so it must be checked by default. I'm doing a couple of other things, right? I'm overriding material constraints. That's something you could do manually when you're checking a job. And I'm ignoring finite schedule. I'm setting an end date, right? So I'm scheduling, back scheduling from an end date, and it has to be a date time. That was one thing that smacked me when I first started playing with this. And from here, you need your job number, your assembly sequence, your operation sequence, and your op detail sequence. Once those are all known, you can go ahead and do what I'm going to do and process. Excellent. Okay, so that finished. No errors below, so we will jump back into that job and have a little look-see. So what I'm expecting is now this scheduled resource should be moved from BDF01 to BDF02. Great. So now we've not only changed that operations planned resource, but we've changed the scheduling as well. Maybe this is a nice way of thinking of it. Plan versus schedule. Your field here is your plan. This is actually what gets pulled into schedule. Maybe a nice way of kind of dividing that just in terms of logistics. So that said, now that we've gone and done that, we're going to go ahead and create those other jobs that we had previously deleted. one of the nice things here is that quick job entry can be front-ended by DMT, so you can do the same process. Normally, when you think of DMT, you're thinking that it's adding data, but really it's gotten to the point where it's so clever that it can be invoking processes. So you can be doing things like scheduling, or in this case, like quick job entry. So in my case, I'm going to create a bunch of jobs. As you can see, I'm going to engineer them. I'm going to give them a date against which to go. I'm going to schedule them, but I'm going to keep them unfirm. And I've specified the job numbers that I want. So again, you see the button there is grayed out. So I'm going to add new and kick off the process. Now this will go out and create some new jobs. Okay. And now when we come back, we should see 10 jobs for that same part instead of 5. All right, so we have 1 through 10. Okay, so 1, those are the ones that we've been looking at this whole time and updating and rescheduling. And now 10, these are those unfirm jobs now that have the materials and the operations. Now, because we made those changes to the part master, we should be able to come back here and expect that A, the material will be properly related to the related operation, and that B, this operation now should be scheduled against BDF 02 instead of BDF 01. So excellent, we have success there. So those steps now, we've walked through all of those and successfully made the changes that are needed. Now, I guess there are probably a couple of other, similar type scenarios that have master file scenarios and then implications. I had some really nasty ones where engineering was making part number changes, where this part's no longer called this, it's called that, and you need to swap it out. And this is a part that could be sold as a spare part, it could be held in inventory, it could be on job bills, materials. It just becomes a nightmare to change. So you end up having to go through a real complex process of kind of checklisting all the things. Do I have open allocations for this part? Do I have open inventory? Do I have any buy to order, like on the sales order? Those are can be a problem. Do I have stuff that's out on purchase orders? Do I have stuff that's out on subcontract? Do I have stuff that's on jobs? So making a change becomes a much more exhaustive and kind of full company-wide activity. I thought about doing that one for this demo, but given the number of steps in my penchant for talking and blabbing, I had a feeling we wouldn't make the due date here. So really, I would say that's kind of the key here, is understanding all the steps you need to do. Once you've done them, DMT does, as you can see, have a bunch of very nice, helpful components to make that work. Let's talk about a couple more things here while we're at it. Multi-table updates. We'll talk about this just a little more because this is fun. So when you have multi-tables, and you can kind of skin this cat in a couple of different ways, right? So if you're looking at updating multiple tables, you could say, for instance, you have a part and a part plant, right? If you have a part record, you could run a DMT update to create the parts, and then you could come back and run a secondary update to update the part plant records and do your things there. Now, remember, this is part plant are like kissing cousins, but bitter enemies at the same time, because it's very easy for the data to get out of sync. And sometimes that's by design and sometimes that's by accident. So if you're looking at your part screen and thinking everything's right, and really Epicor is driving everything off of that nefarious little part plant record, you can see that. So sometimes it's helpful to do a multi-table update. So you create everything at once, and then you don't have to bother with this update, then that update. And I'm thinking of 3 key places where this is really common. So we talk about part plant, also part warehouse gets created when you create a part plant by default functionality. So you have to go back and mop that thing up. Now, similarly, when you create a sales order line or a purchase order line, there's a release line that also gets created no matter what. And it might get created with settings that you don't want to use. So you need to come back and do it. So these multi-table updates are really helpful to do that. So, I got ahead of myself. So DMT allows for some of that. So one of the examples is the part combined DMT routine. It creates a part plant, a part rev, and a part warehouse. It's like two times the fun. So what we'll do there And oh yeah, I should probably note here before we jump into the demo is child tables can be identified using the child name hashtag child field name convention. So for example, part plant hashtag minimum quantity. And for our demos here, I'm going to do two actually. I'm going to do the part combined DMT to create a bunch of those part records. But then there's another one that's the part revision where you can create the part rev, and there's a child table that you don't always think of. I was showing it to you an example of the part audit records so that you can specify some audit comments, which can be helpful. So let's have a look at DMT. So what I'm doing here was I have the part combined source. And so what I did was I liked that part I had made so much, I decided I was going to make another 9 of them. Okay, so I'm making that same finished good, and I'm going to create it at the part level. I'm also going to create the plant record and assign a couple of plant items, the minimum quantity and the days of supply. I love days of supply for some reason. My favorite go-to field. And I'm going to add a revision right away. So I'm going to give it a revision ID and a revision short description. And I'm going to give it a part warehouse record as well. So we're going to create 4 for the price of 1. And so now we're going to add new, since we're adding new, and we're going to kick off the process. And now it will think and it'll start doing. All right, very good. So do a little testing here. When we come back, we're going to be looking for days of supply of 14, minimum on-hand quantity of 10. We jump back into our part maintenance screen. And let's find BDF FG02. Oh, you're mad at me because you think let's just do this. Clear out and start over. Turn it off and back on. IT answer. Okay, so we have all those fields that I had set there, the class and the group. It's a manufactured part. I had set that. Everything else pretty much defaulted other than the part and the description. Came through with a revision. Okay, an unapproved revision, mind you, with the revision ID and the rev short description. And then we go to the sites tab. We see here we have a minimum on hand of 10. And then at the planning factors, we have a days of supply of 14. So nice. We put that, bundled that thing together, laid it out, and it made a nice bunch of updates for us. Now, I've seen some cases where I've run into many to one challenges, and I'm not sure if that was my user problems, my limits to my IQ and bandwidth of brain, or if it had to do with a software limitation or a limitation of the version. I've seen some of that where you try to create, say, multiple plant records for a single part in this update. Sometimes it balks at that. Could just be that I was missing some fields and such. Be curious if anybody else has seen that or if they've circumvented that in one format or another. All right, so that was the part combined. Now let's talk about one last thing we will do here is we will talk about the part revision load. Okay, so nice thing about part revision load, and you'll see this if you've tried to approve part revisions through DMT without including the part audit table, the system smacks you. Say audit change description required if you're going to approve this thing. Now, it's not required if you're doing a part hopper or a part material update for some reason. When you do that, it gets in, it gets out, it plugs in a generic bit of information into the audit table and it's off and running. But if you want to unapprove and reapprove a part on your own, it's going to demand this extra information. So I went ahead and said, okay, I have a part here, my BDF FG01. I'm going to create some more revisions for that. I'm going to approve them, and they're going to be effective kind of out into the future. So I'm going to go ahead and add these as new records and then kick that process off. Okay, so that ran as intended. Now we'll go back to the part maintenance screen. I'll come back to. All right, we'll look here, just expanding my tree view. Now, instead of one revision, I have many. And if I look here, okay, oh, interesting. All right, so you can see here, it was spooky, and I'm going out for Halloween as the Wolfman this year, so I was in an owl mood. Christmas comes around, and I'm very festive, and then as And this is interesting that some of the components, it's balking at you. So it matches those dates of components. That's an interesting little piece here. And then I set this out for a year from now. And yes, DMT is very spooky. Anytime that you're doing that kind of black magic, you can get kind of Gandalf level off from your associates. So that's a good thing always. All right, so if we're talking about table updates, I think we've covered all the biggies here. Child name, field name, as the convention, and there are probably a couple of other places where I've done this in the past. I think sales order updates is a good one. One challenge, of course, is everybody wants to explicitly set the indexed fields like sales order number, right? I want to load 10 sales orders, but instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of the line nums, I want it to be 1, 3, 7, 22. DMT doesn't allow for that. You can plug it in, but it's going to ignore it and say, no, I think it should be numbered this. So when you see conversion cases, when people are converting records for a go live, what I see most often is they'll load the full number of lines so everything gets spaced out as intended, and then they'll come back and either delete those lines or close those lines or do something like that to mop those out so that you have all the live lines, but they map back to the original. Your other option, of course, is create a spreadsheet that has kind of a cross-reference between old record and new record, because you can load the same PO number, for instance, but PO line 1 might have been PO line 3 in the previous system, and then you create a spreadsheet that cross-references those, and you use that for a week or two while all those transactional records flush themselves out. So I've seen that as a pretty common way of addressing that. One last thing here, I see I have a little bit of time, so I'll do a little bit of rabbit holing here because it's fun. So one thing that's really interesting is how when you're working through the BO, Epicor has calculated fields. Of course, they're not fields that are held in the database, but they're fields that are calculated as a result of other things. And these are kind of bidirectional, right? There'll be something like on a sales order entry, you'll get some sort of total inventory number or whatever calculated and presented to you for a given part of your total available amount. And that's not held anywhere in the database. It's summed up from a couple of other locations. You have fields that go the other way, where Epicor will take a value and then it'll plug it in different places. It'll separate them in other places. There was a demo I wanted to put together, didn't have the time, I'm afraid, for loading serial numbers on the part master. So it's real interesting. I think I might have written a blog about it, where you have the serial number values on the part master, a whole bunch of different fields. But when you're entering them as an end user, you only have 3 fields. It's stored as 5, but it's entered as 3. And sure enough, when DMT, they have those calculated fields available for you so that you can enter those values and have DMT do the rest. It's pretty clever. And there is one more that I like to think about here. And let's jump into, if I still have method tracker. And this is my favorite example, final operation. So we come here and we have this flag, final operation. So if we come to help, field help, and we pull this up, they got a nice large description telling you everything you need to know about it. But more importantly, in the technical details section, all right, it's plugged in as final opera, but it has no database field. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, so what you find is that value is actually stored in the database on the part revision field, whereas you're entering it through the part opera. So if we come into DMT, and let's do a bill of operations, and I'm going to use the little template builder. This is kind of just a fun little thing. I probably should have mentioned that. There's a couple of ways to figure out what fields you need to include when you're doing a DMT. One is to hit the required button, and they'll tell you a bunch of things. They're not always honest. And there are plenty of times where, and DMT is kind of funny the way it'll correct you. Sometimes it'll tell you there. And then sometimes it'll let you load your template, and when you load the template, it'll say that you're missing something. And then sometimes it'll wait for you actually to hit the process button and try to kick it off. And then it'll tell you when you see all your records failing because you're missing a value. DMT kind of likes to do that just to keep you on your toes and necessitate that you find consultants like me to help you out. Fortunately, they have this nice little cancel button here. So if you see things getting off the rails, proverbially, you can proverbial nip that one in the bud. But let's go ahead and look at the other tool, which is template builder. So this is a nice tool here they have, and this is the full collection of database and calculated fields that you can use in a load. And so we are in the part opper. So you have final opper. Okay, so final opper, it's a Boolean field. This isn't a real database field. You can load it in here and it'll write to the part revision table and set that for you. How clever. Now let's look at part revision. And helps if I put in a space, part revision, not restriction or division. All right. And we look, we do the same game here, and we pull up the template builder and we look at final opper. There it is again. So if you are masochistic and you want to try to update the same data from multiple places, you can do this. You can update the final opper on that part rev. So here, final opper is an int. So you're saying that this opper, op sequence 20 or op sequence 40, is the final opper for this revision level. If you're doing it through the bill of operations load, it's a Boolean. So you're just saying this record, this operation record, which has its op sequence, of course, is the final operation. It all hits the database ultimately in the same place, but Epicor, as always, Epicor wouldn't be Epicor if they didn't give you 3 different ways to solve the same problem. So if nothing else, that keeps you busy on a Friday night. Instead of going off and having fun, you could be figuring out multiple ways to update the same field. So glad I was able to slip that in, and I see that I'm running out of time here. So I am going to turn it over for any questions. And if we are done after that, then we might let you out all a little early today.
So Brad, we're going to have pity on you since you've been trapped in that basement for so long. We do have a question.
Excellent.
And this is regarding a customer who has their Epicor on a public cloud, SaaS. They have an issue when sales selects the incorrect unit of measure, and they need to change them on existing jobs. Right now, they have to go through the formal process of requesting it, and that can take quite a while, maybe 24 hours or so. Is there a way that DMT or any other method would allow them to directly update the unit of measure on existing jobs?
Existing job. So let me throw up a big caveat, because UOMs is its own ugly rabbit hole you could go down to, assuming that you're still within the same UOM class and that they entered the wrong UOM class that you wanted there. That should be very doable. If you're working across UOM classes, it could be more of a finagle, because changing UOMs can be quite often a real labor of love. So if it's as simple as going to the job header and changing it there, yeah, have you tried to do it through DMT already? I guess would be my one question, because I would certainly give that a shot, because I believe you can change the UOM on the sales order. I believe they give you that availability there when you're checking that. So yeah, that would be, I would say that would be my first try, would be to see if you could get those synced up in that way. You could also try an updatable BAQ, but really, I haven't seen a lot of cases where you get the same problem either way, because of course they're using that same update EXT method underneath them. So I think that might be, you might be kind of stuck either way. And I'm not going to recommend anybody touch the SQL database, because someone's going to come off and club me even in my basement. So.
All right. That was the only question I have, unless Cindy knows of some more.
Sorry about that. Nope, I believe that covers it.
All right. We're really close to wrapping up on time, and maybe a moment early.
Oh, one real quick, and sorry if this was, did you already answer Crozier's question?
Yes.
Rob, yes, okay, just making sure everything got answered in that. Then yes, we're done.
All right, well, very good then. Well, folks, I think that means we've completed our summit here today. I want to thank everyone who stuck it out through the end. As Rob had mentioned, we'll be handing out some prizes for folks who stuck with us to the end. We'll do a random drawing here and reach out to you from there. Other than Cindy, Rob, I just want to thank you myself for attending this and sitting through this with us. This was a lot of fun, and I hope you left with some value, and would love to talk to you further if you have any needs going forward. So thank you again. Have a very fine weekend and a very happy Halloween.
Thank you all for coming. And we'll be reaching out with those recordings. I know some of you might just want one session. So I think we'll be able to break that up for you, but just wanted to let you know, we will definitely be keeping you guys in the loop for that.
All right. Thank you all. This is Daryl. Have a fantastic afternoon. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.